Imagine you're 19 and somebody tells you, here, take over one of the most beloved comic books of all time. Good luck. That's basically what happened to Gerry Conway back in the 70s. Conway had to take over Amazing Spider-Man from the famous Stan Lee at 19 years old. How did he do? Not very well. And then he killed off Gwen Stacy. Conway's run can be split into two halves. Before Gwen's death and after. At the start of the run, Peter Parker is doing well. He's finally in a stable relationship with the love of his life, Gwen Stacy. His best friend, Harry, is back from rehab. Life is pretty good, all things considered, after so many years of pain. It's fully deserved. He's still broke and he's still getting his ass beat. His life isn't collapsing on itself like it has done in the past. Right now, he's got it all under control as much as he ever could. If you're a Spider-Man fan, you've likely heard about this story. If you're a comic book fan, you've probably heard about this story. It's possibly the most famous Spider-Man story of all time. There's Conway's run before this and Conway's run after this. There's Spider-Man before this and there's Spider-Man after this. The night Gwen Stacy died. Every following Conway issue is tied to Peter's grief and the consequences of Gwen's death. This grief is still to this day referenced in the comic books, and it's still explored in the adaptations like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and No Way Home. If you ever wondered why Spider-Man's girlfriends keep getting thrown off of buildings, this story is why. When I first came across this story, it was through Masterworks Volume 13. This book begins with the death of Gwen Stacy's storyline. The issue begins with Harry in a bed and everyone's concerned for him. It felt like I started reading in the middle of a story. I felt like I was missing something. Then Goblin comes in, kidnaps Gwen Stacy, Spider-Man pursues, and Gwen Stacy dies in the following battle. And Norman perishes as well next issue. This felt super jarring. I felt lost and confused, and I actually stopped reading the collection because I just felt like I was missing something, that I wasn't supposed to be reading this yet. Now, years later, I've read every single issue leading up to this story, including Annuals and Spectacular Spider-Man, and I can confirm that yes, I basically missed nothing. If you've picked up an iconic comic book storyline, you've probably felt the same feeling I felt, feeling like you just started watching a show in the later seasons and you have this innate need to see what led up to this episode. While yes, there are stories that give Gwen Stacy's death more context, there's nothing else you really need. Issue 105, Harry returns from rehab, and after that, he does absolutely nothing. I read every issue leading up to this story, and I still felt like I missed something. That's just how comic books work. That feeling will always be there, and it sucks, but it is what it is. My point with this is that if you've ever heard about an iconic storyline and you were scared off from reading it like I was, well, no, just read the stories you're interested in. You don't need more. That feeling will never go away, and honestly, the context of it changes almost nothing about how I felt about this story, and it's never really done that. If it's a well-written story, it will entertain you or get emotion out of you. That's success, and it's worth more than continuity. The first year, Conway works with an artist, John Romita, who's a Spider-Man veteran by this point. Romita's essentially, I believe, mentoring Conway for the first year. I think that makes sense, and I think you can tell. The first year of stories aren't that good. They are mediocre at best. The pacing feels off. The Doc Ock Hammerhead storyline, I love Hammerhead, but despite that, this storyline goes on for way too long. It's like 4 issues, and it could have and should have been 3, if not straight up 2. One storyline is a repeat from Spectacular Spider-Man. Already read it, it's fine. 2 issues are dedicated to a Hulk crossover, it's fine. I would recommend skipping the first year and skipping right to the death of Gwen Stacy storyline and going from there, because that's the part that people mainly talk about, and that's where the real meat of the run begins. After Gwen's death, the story ends with Peter returning home where MJ awaits him. Peter tells MJ she doesn't understand, she doesn't care. He tells her to leave. Wouldn't want to spoil your fun. MJ has every reason to be mad at Peter for this. MJ, we know, would leave Peter over this. Instead, the story ends with MJ closing the door and staying with her friend. It's a beautiful moment, and I gotta be honest, it made my heart a stone beat. It's fantastic writing, and again, you don't need 120 issues of history to feel this. Harry loses his father in this storyline, which leads to Harry also becoming distant and mean. This grief is what the rest of the run is about. The next storylines put Peter in this state of anger and panic. He's lashing out at his loved ones. Loss of Gwen is constantly on Peter's mind. Peter will talk and think about Gwen constantly. Characters will be drawn to look like her. Grief is the main theme of the run. The fighting and drama could get tiring very quickly. I got tired of a lot of the fighting in Stan Lee's run, and yet The drama works here. It's very compelling. And why? I think one of the big reasons why MJ and Flash and Peter work so well is that they don't actually hate each other. They yell and they might throw fits. MJ and Peter both isolate themselves, but they always understand each other. They help each other anyway, despite what the other person might say, and they never stop loving each other over it. The understanding, the empathy is what makes it feel human instead of contrived drama. Harry, though, doesn't get the same treatment. He grows ever more resentful towards Peter, and their friendship deteriorates quickly. Peter tries to patch things up, and even MJ tries it too, but Harry refuses to listen to reason. He offers no forgiveness and no sympathy. Peter and MJ don't write him off, though. Harry's their friend, no matter what he says. That right there is what makes you buy their relationships. Conway's a young writer. He started writing Spider-Man at 19 years old. This is his greatest asset, and it allows him to really get into Peter and the rest of the cast's heads. He has their voices down really well. He nails the young man's experience. Peter's emotionally a little volatile, but clearly mature enough to deal with it, you know? MJ is a three-dimensional character, which was not the norm for female characters in the 70s, as we've seen from previous characters in this series. There's a greater level of complexity, and all the drama feels a lot more natural than in the past, and I think only a young guy could have brought this kind of vision to the table. Conway's run is much darker than the previous run by Stan Lee. People are getting murdered constantly. Like, seriously, people rarely got murdered during Stan Lee's time. Here, now it feels like someone is getting killed every other issue. Like, God. Kangaroo gets straight up vaporized out of existence. Hammerhead murders a lot of people the old-fashioned way with Tommy guns. God, I love Hammerhead. Jackal murders this store owner. Vulture is trying to murder MJ. There's a lot of death in this run, and it's a constant presence Peter nor the reader can get away from. As The Amazing Spider-Man has been going on, the stories have gotten longer over time. Originally during Ditko days, each issue was standalone stories. It was an anthology series. Conway's plots are like 1 to 3 issues long, and the drama, the character arcs, they last the entire run. Each issue adds to their journey. The plots aren't related, but the characters are what tie it all together, and it makes Conway's run feel like a one cohesive journey. It's why year 1 feels like the odd one out. It doesn't have the character development that ties it with the rest of the run. The book felt like it was just spinning its wheels until Conway finally started doing the real story he wanted to do about loss. And I want to make it very clear to everyone, Conway didn't kill Gwen Stacy just for the shock value. Gwen got done dirty, as I've talked about in my Gwen Stacy video, but Conway does use her death to launch all the characters to a whole new level. Gwen's death is needed for this run to work. Is it fridging? Yeah. Does it suck? Yeah, it kinda does, but just because it's bad for Gwen doesn't mean it's bad for the book. And it is worth noting that this story, Conway specifically explores that grief, and I think he does it very well. Conway also uses the villains to force Peter to confront his character development. Peter is unable to control himself, so he fights Luke Cage, another hero. Angry Peter is back and needs to be put back into his cage. Peter regresses into what he was like as a kid, this angry little and I think that makes sense. The added melancholy from Gwen's death really helps add layers of emotion to these stories. Just compare this throwaway Luke Cage crossover with the Medusa or Black Widow ones from Stan Lee's run. It's night and day, and I think that this Luke Cage story is a much better story. And I really think it wouldn't be possible without Gwen's death, that shadow looming over everything. Peter's anger doesn't last long. It's only really one issue long problem, which I think is 100% the correct choice. If this happened today, the arc would last like 50 some issues. I much prefer the condensed version. Villains are more dangerous than before. Their plans are longer and more convoluted. Jackal's plans take 2 years to fully unfold. Almost all of these villains are willing to kill if they need to, and many of them do. There's personal stakes, like Molten Man is slowly dying. Either he wins or he dies. It's not about getting money, it's about his life. That makes it a little bit more tense, you know? It's not just the villains that are more dangerous, the world itself hates Spider-Man more than ever before. And I'm getting really tired of saying this, but at least this time it's a more of a permanent change instead of something that is there for a single arc. The world thinks Spider-Man murdered Gwen Stacy and Green Goblin, so now he's wanted for murder throughout the entire run. Conway never resolves this plot, so it's just constant pressure that's always on. You'll periodically see Spider-Man be chased by cops, and again, it's a permanent thing this time. Before, he would be cleared out by Captain Stacy, or he would find a way out of that. Not this time. This time it's just permanently New York's Most Wanted. Later in the run, the villains begin to attack Peter Parker himself. His apartment gets blown up and he's forced to move around until he finds a new place to live. Conway is really putting Peter Parker through the ringer, but amazingly, he doesn't really overdo it. This could easily turn into misery porn, but Conway manages to add in enough light to keep it all together. Peter loses loved ones, but he still has people. He has Aunt May, ever so lovely. Peter's always under pressure, but he does catch breaks even though he claims otherwise. He gets moments to reconcile with Flash, who now feels like an actual friend. He no longer makes fun of Peter, but instead helps him when he needs help. Flash has grown into a better man, and it's honestly very satisfying to see. Flash's arc has been one of my favorites, and getting rid of the last remnants of the bully himself really completes the character well. MJ and Peter are there for each other throughout the entire run, even when things get hard. Many stories here are very dark, but there are also some really goofy storylines. Like, this isn't just one long, miserable storyline. There, Doc Ock in one storyline marries Aunt May, and there's Spider-Mobile in this run. I'll get to you too. Conway nails the balance for most part, I think, really well. Darkness doesn't work without the light. You need both to have something relatable. So let's talk about the most bizarre story of the run. Doc Ock marries Aunt May. Nothing to say except that I really don't like it. It feels like a throwback to Silver Age Adventure with the weird pitch, but there is a modern edge to it. Like, people are dying on page, and I think that's something that I think kind of ruins it a little bit. It takes me out. If you're gonna write something fun like a throwback, maybe you shouldn't be killing people by the dozens on page. It feels a little out of place, you know? One thing about the story I like is the MJ side of it. People are hanging out at a Christmas party talking about Peter. MJ's denying her feelings because of course she is. She's afraid to be hurt and she refuses to confront that. And then Robinson has a little speech, talks about how Peter is going through a rough patch, and MJ on the surface doesn't seem like the perfect girlfriend for him, but that doesn't mean everybody else needs to run in and make Peter's choices for him. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let your friend have some space and let them figure things out for themselves. I think the idea that works here is the contrast. Peter is hiding in his Spider-Man life. You know, he's in this world of silly fun and excitement instead of having these real difficult conversations with MJ. And you know, maybe that's not that much of a bad thing. Maybe it's what he needs. It's ultimately might just be his way of dealing with his problems. I like the contrast. I think it works, but the wedding thing, it just doesn't land for me. It's just, I don't really have a smart explanation. I just don't like it. Now, the other side of this is that I might be a hypocrite for this, but I really like the Spider-Mobile. I love it. I'm having a hard time preaching why I hate the wedding, but I love this car. But I'm gonna try. I can think of 3 points for explanations. The Spider-Mobile is one tied to Peter's money issues. The concept is treated as absurd, helping feel like a more authentic part of the world. 2, Spider-Mobile doesn't kill anyone. Yet. 3, it's a side plot, not the main event. Spider-Mobile only really appears few times here and there, and that's it. Usually at the end of a story or at the very start of it. The wedding itself is the main plot of an issue. It's like, while the Spider-Mobile is just kind of almost like a gag that happens for a couple of pages and then goes away for the rest of the issue. Conway's age is one of the best things he's got going for him because he gets Peter's and MJ's voice down really well, but I think it's also one of his worst traits, and it does lead to his writing being a little amateurish at times. Spider-Man is just going about his business, swinging around, and then it's just boom! Surprise Doc Ock out of nowhere. There's this scene where Dr. Connors is just hanging out, thinking about Man-Thing, as we all are, and then he just knocks over a glass and boom! He's the Lizard again.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
And the other problem I have with him is that he can be a little edgy with the amount of casual death. I think an older writer would have been more careful with something like that, put more emphasis on it. My favorite villain of the run is Hammerhead. He gets shot in the head and is left for dead. When he wakes up, he has amnesia, doesn't remember anything. So, with his new life, he decides all he wants from his new life is to be a gangster. So he becomes a gangster. Amazing motivation. Pure cinema right there. Oh, that's so good. His superpower is that the top of his head is indestructible. Like, not even the entire head, just the top of it. I unironically love Hammerhead so much. It's silly, but Conway knows that. The title of an issue is Gang War Schmang War. All what I want to know is, who the heck is Hammerhead? Absolute cinema. Bravo. Bravo, Gerry. You did it again. Oh, I love it so much. In issue 124, Spider-Man fights against Man-Wolf, a man who turns into a monster. Specifically, J. Jonah Jameson's son turns into a monster. In order to stop it, Jameson has to pull off a ruby himself. He has like a ruby stuck to his neck or something. It's painful, so he doesn't rip it off. So he hides his little sickness, and thus when he turns into a monster, people get hurt. He's saved by the Spider-Man at the end, because Spider-Man just kind of comes in and just rips the ruby off. Like, it's that simple. And to me, I think what Conway's going for that the lesson is that sometimes, in order to save ourselves, we gotta rip a little piece of ourselves off, no matter how much it hurts. It's a great story. It's one of my favorites from the run. Spider-Man ripping the ruby off, I think is saying something about letting other people help you, relating to Peter's self-isolating ways during this era. Okay, makes sense, but I can't help but to feel like it should have been Jameson who does it. Ultimately, it's Jameson's failure that creates the monster, so I think it should be Jameson's arc to overcome his fear and rip the ruby off and stop the madness. I think it would have been more impactful if Spidey's role was to just encourage Jameson, give him a little pep talk so Jameson can save himself. That is followed by Vulture murder mystery. Vulture murdered a woman who happens to look like Gwen Stacy just to have her in the bait, and now Vulture is trying to murder MJ. Hey look, MJ is thrown off from a great height. It's a repeat of Gwen Stacy death scene. I sure do hope nobody repeats this and runs this imagery to the ground, robbing of it all its power. How cheap would you have to be to do that? Up next is the first appearance of everyone's favorite homicidal maniac, the Punisher, and the Jackal, essentially the big bad of Conway's run, a puppet master who's constantly manipulating Spider-Man and his villains from the shadows throughout the entire run. Punisher's backstory is kept a mystery, which is really funny considering how famous Punisher is nowadays. I at least get a special kind of enjoyment just watching Conway try to make this guy appear mysterious and cool. I see you, Gerry. I know more than you. Punisher's backstory is that his family was murdered, so he becomes the Punisher and now goes around killing criminals, which makes him another villain that is tied to Peter's sad boy arc. I love the cohesion with these villains. The purposeful use of the villains elevates the run from a random collection of stories into something greater than the sum of its parts. I think Conway's really good with the villains he's using. Okay, let's talk about the art. First year of the run is drawn by John Romita and Gil Kane. The rest is drawn by Ross Andru. Art is just another way it feels out of place because it's just done by a completely different artist. Andru's art imitates John Romita's style, so the book does look familiar. So what separates Andru from the other artists? I feel like Andru is the first artist to really take advantage of Spider-Man's acrobatics. Ditko and the rest drew Spider-Man kind of more stiff and more like a man in a costume, you know? Andru has Spider-Man jump from wall to wall in fights, Spider-Man's jumping over his villains, and Andru takes great care to show Spider-Man's speed with the poses and this ghosting effect. I don't know what this thing is called, but it's showing speed. This nowadays is very normal for the character, but Andru might just be the beginning of a more flexible, faster Spider-Man. At least that's how I feel like reading this, that he's become more acrobatic. Andru has some creative storytelling choices, like here, Tarantula's backstory is conveyed through a projector, and that's what the art looks like. There's another sequence where Spider-Man lights up a dark warehouse with his spider signals, and so there's this fight scene that is completely dark, except for things highlighted by his light. It's great pencils, and I love the coloring of it. I think it's a better version of Steve Ditko's Molten Man fight scene. It's fantastic. Andru has some really good visual storytelling. Like, you tell me, what do these two panels convey? I think that's great. During Ditko and Romita's eras, I felt like the covers were consistently fantastic, especially during Romita's time, but now I feel like the covers have become much more unimaginative and boring. The covers hold spoilers for the issues, like Molten Man's motivations are revealed on the cover. Harry's turn to the Goblin is revealed on the cover, and the clones are revealed on the covers. They've returned to using dialogue on the covers, and I just hate it. Like, I don't know who's doing the covers. Maybe it's Andru himself. I don't really know, but I don't know. I think I don't like these covers. Make fun of me all you want. I enjoy a good cover, and I will not apologize for it. The biggest thing I've seen people bring up about Andru's art over the years is his locations. Andru takes great care to replicate locations authentically. His landscapes look like a real city with a lot of details and a great amount of variety to them. You can see landmarks in the backgrounds. There's these little details like trees on sidewalks. He manages to capture New York better than any of the previous artists. His locations feel more immersive. The characters hang out in real-looking locations like the New York airport. For the first time, you get a feel for what New York is like. It feels more authentic. To be fair, I've never been to New York, so I wouldn't really know how real any of this is. I just feel like it's more real, and that's what really matters in a book like this. The fight scenes have some exciting locations. Spider-Man fights on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. He fights in a moving bus that is moving through traffic. He fights on a moving train. Andru's art is not brought up as often as the other Spider-Man artists, but make no mistake, he's a great artist, and I think his work deserves to be appreciated. I think Conway struggles to begin and end his stories very smoothly. His endings are anticlimactic. The moment the plot's done, he ends the story like literally the panel Multiman's defeated, the story ends. No epilogue, or falling action, or nothing. Just hard, the end. You thought this was the climax, but no, this was the falling action. Conway has this little trick where he implies things happening between issues. He often doesn't really show things happening. For example, Peter's relationship with MJ is often talked about, but not shown. When they grieve Gwen together, we don't get to see it. When they go on dates, we don't really get to see it. We know it happens because they mention going on dates and they clearly patch things up. Much of it is done off panel. I think it's quite effective. I really do feel this relationship. It feels very natural and I love it. I think one of the reasons why it works is because we see the moments that make Peter grow. At the end of a story, Peter might have a little monologue spelling out the lesson of the day, like with the Vulture. The villain is defeated, and it feels kind of a smaller event than it should. It's like Columbo, where the episode ends immediately after Columbo gets his evidence. I don't think it's bad or anything. I think it's just a stylistic choice. In some stories, it can be quite effective. It adds this feeling of continuity to everything. You gotta read the next issue to see the fallout. Everything feels more connected. It feels like Peter's living his life, and we only get to see small glimpses of it. Whether it be villains or character development or relationships, it feels like time is passing between issues, even when you're not reading the book. I love the sense of progression it brings. After all this time, we finally get to payoffs to all the storylines Conway has been building up to. One of the biggest is Harry's downfall. Harry finally snaps and he becomes the new Green Goblin. It's overall a fantastic story of Spider-Man going against his best friend. Harry has genuinely gone crazy. I mean, look at this guy's eyes. Like, that is not a sane man. Spider-Man has way too many villains who are crazy by this point. Brain damage or super-villain mental illness is a tired trope, but I will defend Harry's insanity for a little bit. He's Peter's best friend, and the fact that he is sick and not evil makes the whole scenario a little bit more tragic in a fitting way, I think. Peter has a kind heart, so he wants to help Harry, which kinda traps him with his best friend, until Harry either gets better or one of them dies. I think it's a very Spider-Man-esque tragedy, very fitting. I don't think they ever explain why Harry goes nuts. He just kind of snaps one day. He loses his father, girlfriend, regular friend, and Peter does walk out on him and possibly murder his father, so he has every right to be mad, I think. On top of that, he's dealing with his ODing, his addiction. Harry's quietly going through it, and I guess he finally couldn't take it. Like, I more or less binged Conway's run a week or two ago, so maybe I missed the explanation or forgot about it during the binge, but this is how I'd imagine Conway thought about Harry. Now, I'm gonna place a guess that it'll be revealed by another writer that Norman shot Harry up with the Goblin serum during the rehab, since we don't know what happened there, and they were alone together, and we haven't seen anything there. Harry's snap is so sudden that I feel like that's gonna be a very easy and obvious explanation for everything. As for the Goblin's plot, he pulls a bit of a Dark Knight and kidnaps Aunt May, MJ, and Flash. Everybody gets kidnapped, but none of them have reactions to it. Like, this book has been pretty clear before. Aunt May could die from like even the smallest of shocks. So why don't we get a reaction from her and MJ and, you know, any of them? You'd think they'd want to talk about it or at least have a reaction to it, but no. Nothing. The dilemma feels kind of contrived and kind of pointless in the end. Nobody gets hurt, nobody has a reaction, no revelations, it's really weak stuff. If Peter realized MJ is more important than Aunt May, that'd be an interesting character moment because it would show his growth. If someone died, it'd be justified. If it just made Flash question Peter's identity more, that'd work, but instead, nothing. Maybe something happens off panel, but we don't see or hear about it. Or maybe it's in a spin-off again, that's something Marvel likes to do. They hate the idea that somebody would just pick up a book and just, oh, dear God, read it. Can't have that. The story does end with one of my favorite moments from the run. When Harry's defeated, he's taken to the hospital, and a police officer comments on Harry's insanity. And Peter just says, whatever he needs, he's got it. That's my friend. Oh, it's harrowing. I love that ending. Conway's run made an impact. This is the first run to not have either Stan Lee or Steve Ditko working on it, not counting the 4 issues by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. Conway had to prove Spider-Man can survive past its original creators, and Conway managed to do that. He upped the emotional stakes for the characters, and I personally find the quality of writing to be even better than it was during Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's runs. The run had to do more than just impress me, of course. Ditko and Lee left behind a massive legacy of classic storylines. I think Conway and Andru were able to match that. Harry's downfall is as iconic as is the Clone Saga. Conway's run is a banger after an issue about Kangaroo after banger. The night Gwen Stacy died even got a movie adaptation. Gwen's death had an impact on the industry. You can criticize Conway for fridging a female character, and it's all fair criticism, but the truth is that this didn't happen back then. This was unthinkable. It was innovative. Gwen Stacy was the original girlfriend who got murdered. She's the reason girlfriends started to get killed at weirdly high rates. Gwen's death led to the comic book industry embracing the darker storylines of the Bronze Age, to the point this storyline is sometimes pointed out as the end of Silver Age. Although I disagree with that statement, but the fact is people call it that in the first place shows its impact. Ain't nobody calling Crisis on Campus the story that ended Silver Age, you know? That's impact and legacy. And for a 19-year-old kid and less talked about Spider-Man artist, that's pretty good. After all of this comes the grand finale of the run with the final arc of the run, the original Clone Saga, the good one. Peter and MJ finally kiss for the first time. After all of this, Peter's finally ready to move on and build something new. It's one of the most earned kisses in comics, and it's like, ugh, I was giggling like a little girl, kicking my feet up like, And what happens after? Gwen Stacy comes back, she's alive after all. Peter deals with it. He had just done healing, and here enters Gwen to reopen that wound anew. This sends Peter on a bit of a downward spiral, and he stops talking to MJ for a while. MJ takes this quite personally. She's hurt by Peter's distance, which in most books would be your typical kind of annoying drama, but here it's quite effective. MJ wouldn't normally get mad about this type of thing. In fact, she'd normally be the one staying away from Peter. Her being mad about Peter is out of character. It's character development, and it's the reason why this works so much better than it does with other characters like Gwen Stacy. This isn't the norm. MJ and Aunt May sit down, and MJ finally breaks her facade of a girl who doesn't care about anything. She admits she wants to be with Peter. She admits she's hurt by not being wanted by Peter. Aunt May gives her a little speech about love and fighting for it and all that jazz. May was the one to introduce MJ to Peter. She was the original shipper between the two. To see her give MJ this one final pep talk about love is one of the most fitting ways this could go, at least as far as I think. It's fitting because of the stuff I talked about in the Ditko video that I don't want to repeat. Even better, this is one of the only times Uncle Ben is mentioned by Aunt May. If you use Uncle Ben sparingly, it can still be emotional, and to me, I felt a little beat in my ice cold heart. MJ confronts Peter, she gives him a chance. MJ feels like a real human being. Her feelings are complex. She loves Peter, but she's also afraid of that love. She's mad at him because she's afraid to lose him. Many writers would get at least this part right, but then they overdo the drama. Here, MJ never turns her back to Peter. She's trying to talk to him, and she pretends she's not, but she never pretends she's not here for him. It could have been easy to make her tell Peter she's breaking up with him, they're done, or have her storm out, but she never does. Peter's the one to close the door on her, and it does hurt to see Peter do that, like soap operas, am I right? But he never pretends it's a bigger deal than it is. All of this Gwen Resurrection nonsense is created by the Jackal. And Jackal is the main villain of the run, making him the fourth great Spider-Man villain, following Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and the Kingpin. Jackal is dangerous and intimidating, but what separates him from the others is that he's just creepy. We haven't seen this kind of unhinged before, I believe. I love how this story builds up over time. I do wish he got more wins over the run. It feels like he's just doing random plots, gets stopped, and escapes only to do another random plot. I would have liked to see more connection between the plots, like maybe he manages to run off with a piece of technology. And then that thing is something he uses to build his final death ray or something like that. As of now, the different plots aren't very connected beyond using the same characters, which I think weakens him a little bit, but it is what it is. Don't get me wrong, Jackal is a fantastic villain, and one of the main reasons I like him so much is that he relates to the themes of the run. Once again, Conway's very intentional with his villains. Warren is a man who fell in love with Gwen Stacy. He lost Gwen, same as Peter. Peter struggles to move on from her throughout the run. Warren is not able to let go of Gwen, so he turns into this villainous Jackal, a creepy, obsessed monster who'll stop at nothing to have Gwen back. He goes as far as to clone Gwen Stacy, which is why she's back. It's a creepy clone created for Warren to possess. And I hate this man so freaking much. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, you creepy old Jackal is that piece in all of us that doesn't want to move on, that piece that haunts you when someone dies. That piece that haunts you when someone dies. It's hard to let go of someone, but we all have to learn to overcome that. You gotta rip a piece of yourself in order to overcome your pain. Defeating Jackal represents Peter overcoming his grief. Unfortunately, Jackal falls off at the end for two reasons. First, it's revealed that he has split personality. I really hate this decision. Warren murders this dude so he can't find out just how creepy Warren is. Okay, makes perfect sense. But he can't handle the fact that he committed murder, so he develops a split personality, Jackal, as a defense. And I find that to rip the decision a little bit of its power, and I think it's very repetitive. Spider-Man's greatest nemesis have a trend of split personalities. Doc Ock, Norman, Lizard, Harry too, but Harry had a more unique feel to it, and because of Peter's relationship, so I'll give it a pass. But Jackal, it's just another one with a brain damage, and it just, I would have preferred if Jackal just was the Jackal, because that's just who he is. Him spiraling out of control and letting his creepy obsession take over was perfect on its own. You did not need a split personality here. I don't think it adds anything. The other failure is Warren's last minute, I don't know what you call it, redemption. In his final moments, Warren's persona comes through and saves Gwen. I feel like it's an undeserved redemption. Conway doesn't take enough time to really set it up. Why does Warren help Gwen? Because Gwen called him a monster? I don't think it's a good enough reason to be convincing, and especially when the personality split was already the worst part of the character. I hate this slow moment. But most importantly, I feel like it goes against the theme of grief. Warren is the face of not letting go, which is why he's the villain. Him changing into Warren for a moment, I don't think it really adds anything to the theme. Peter's the one who gets over his grief, so why repeat that? Why have Warren's humanity shine through? He's done nothing to deserve it, and I think it just says nothing. It adds nothing to the real story here. Peter defeats Warren. Afterwards, he and Gwen have one final talk. Gwen tells Peter while they love each other, they're no longer the same people they used to be. There's no more relationship between them. They need to stop looking back and face ahead towards the future. Peter finally lets go of Gwen, and they go their separate ways. Peter returns home to do what really matters. There, MJ is waiting. His future. Peter enters, and we end on a door closing on us one more time. Creating something new and beautiful with Mary Jane is the most perfect ending I could imagine. This run is some of the best Spider-Man ever made.